Joined now by Ben Wikler. He's the chair of the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. Ben, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's get into it. This week, the Republican National Committee launched its Bank Your Vote effort in Wisconsin. It's a campaign to encourage early voting among Republicans. After years of criticism of early voting from the Republican Party, why do you think they're launching this effort now?
Well, Sarah, most Wisconsinites believe that every legally cast ballot should be counted. That's what a democracy is supposed to be like. The Republican Party has had a strategy for several years now of trying to disqualify and suppress early votes and absentee ballots while telling their voters to cast their ballots on Election Day. It was a strategy really to try to rig the election by getting rid of the ballots of people that they didn't like. It didn't work. So now the GOP is saying, hey, everybody, you should vote early. I'm glad that they've changed their tune. I'd rather have a situation where everybody is included, but they now have a problem, which is that there are a ton of Republican voters who've been listening to politicians like Donald Trump and the Wisconsin Republican Party and getting these messages that early votes are somehow illegitimate. So I think they have an organizing challenge ahead of them. And my hope is that this marks the end of the era where the GOP tries to mess with the rules around our elections, but I don't have a lot of faith in that.
Well, what we have seen is that Republican voters listen, and they particularly listen to Donald Trump, who, it's been reported he is softening on the early voting, which he has criticized, and he is the front runner for the GOP right now in the presidential election. So with that in mind, what if this effort is successful for the Republican Party? They, encourage Republican voters to get out and vote early. And, what if it drives up turnout? How do you feel about that?
So I think for Democrats, for anyone who doesn't want a second Donald Trump term, you have to take this very seriously. And that means that Democrats across the state need to and are organizing now, knocking on doors now, going to county fairs and parades this summer and festivals, talking to voters about the achievements of the Biden administration and the MAGA extremism that not just Donald Trump, but the folks like Derek Van Orden, the whole Republican field represent in 2024. That work can't wait. And what I don't want anyone to do is make the mistake of 2016 and think that Trump is so extreme that there's no way that he could win, stay home, and then watch the GOP roll into a narrow victory.
So as far as those strategies for the Democrats coming up here into 2024, is it just getting the message out and being visible in the community? Is that kind of where it stands right now to drive up voter turnout?
What we've learned is that you have to connect with voters in the way that they appreciate at every opportunity for as long as possible. So that means both knocking on doors and calling phones and texting people and showing up at public events and making sure there's ads in every conceivable medium. We want to just make sure that nobody misses the message. Nobody misses a clear sense of what this administration has been able to successfully do, building jobs, wage growth, bringing down costs and bringing down inflation now. Tremendous successes by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And on the other side, this really radical extremism. I think the Senate race is a perfect example of this. Tammy Baldwin is the lead sponsor of the Women's Health Protection Act, and she's this tremendous leader on Made in America legislation and bringing down the cost of insulin and the cost of prescription drugs. That's a perfect encapsulation of what Democrats stand for and what Republicans are campaigning against. If Wisconsinites know about all of that, we're going to win in 2024.
Let's talk more about some of the messages. So you just kind of mentioned a few of maybe those items that might drive people to the polls. Abortion has been a huge driving factor. It was in the past couple elections. In Wisconsin Supreme Court election, we know it was one of the most expensive races in history because that abortion question was such a driving force. Well, we know that the lawsuit on the 1849 abortion ban could come before a liberal majority Supreme Court as early as this fall. That may be resolved before 2024. And that was a huge message for Democrats in the past couple elections. Without abortion, what are some of the topics that you might want to get your base to the polls with?
The fundamental value of freedom is, as American as apple pie, it's so core to what we love about our country, really across the political spectrum. And the idea that someone who's pregnant could be sitting in the clinic with their doctor figuring out what to do in an emergency situation, and then politicians jump in the middle of the room and make the decision for you. It's just appalling and frankly un-American. I think this issue stays front and center in 2024. Let's say Attorney General Call's lawsuit with Governor Evers succeeds and the 1849 abortion ban falls. then the question becomes, what new legislation will be passed? Will we have a national abortion ban of the kind that Republicans have moved forward over and over and over through Congress whenever they have the power to do so? Or will we have the Women's Health Protection Act, which is Tammy Baldwin's flagship legislation to make sure that the protections of Roe versus Wade, protections for people making their own decisions about their own bodies, that those are written into our laws? Because this will no longer be a question of a 19th century law in Wisconsin, it'll become a national issue that'll affect the White House fight, the Senate fight, and every House fight. And in Wisconsin, we could have new laws. I mean, Republicans are this close to a supermajority in the state assembly. If they get a supermajority, so many Wisconsin Republicans have joined Wisconsin Right to Life and Pro-Life Wisconsin, which support total abortion bans. These questions are very live and active, and when they stop being a question for the courts, they move into the political arena.
Okay, well, Ben Wikler, thank you so much for being on the show this morning. Appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me.